The London Monopoly Board is weird. That's not a London bobby. Look at his hat. I don't have to respect this guy. What is a community chest exactly? What is Fenchurch Street with its piddly little 4 platforms doing alongside the big boys? No Londoner would pick this. Free parking in London?
Why are you like this?
Why are you like this? The reason Monopoly is like this is because it wasn't made by a single lone genius with a vision, but more coalesced over the course of years like a stalagmite, with many different brains adding bits in. And it was originally against monopolies. Our text for today is The Monopolists by Mary Pilon, who actually went and interviewed some of the people who were involved who are still alive, and is my main source for the American half of this story. Our story starts with a 19th century economist called Henry George. And George isn't our main character today, so I'm not going to give a full, nuanced picture of his economic policies. But for our purposes, the thing we need to know is that he was against monopolies.
I was going to put a photo of Henry George here, but then I found this cartoon. This is an anti-Henry George cartoon. And they've made him look cool as hell. Oh no, not free beer!
Monopolies were a huge political issue in the 1880s when, for example, the company Standard Oil, owned by John D. Rockefeller, controlled 90% of America's oil harvest. Henry George wrote a book called Progress and Poverty about how he thought the economy should be run in order to mitigate the bad effects of monopolies, and it was really popular in the US in the 1880s. His followers were called Georgists. One such Georgist was a stenographer in Washington, D.C. called Lizzie Meiji. She was so into Georgism that she actually taught classes on it after work. Outside her job, she was also an actress, a campaigner for women's suffrage, and an inventor, so a very busy lady. And in 1902, she began to talk about a board game that she'd invented that she called the Landlord's Game. And she went back and changed the game a bit over the years, but from the beginning, the Landlord's Game had toy money, deeds, properties that you bought and sold and built houses on, a bank, go to jail, railroads, squares for light and water, and taxes. In 1904, she actually got a patent on this game, so you can look up her patent application and you can see her drawing of the board. It's not exactly the same as modern-day Monopoly. Instead of free parking, there's a public park, and instead of earning £200 for pass and go, you got $100 on a square that has the incredibly Georgist slogan, "Labour upon Mother Earth produces wages." And she wrote a rulebook explaining how to play, and in that rulebook she writes not one, but 2 sets of rules. Now, the first is similar to how we play it today. You play against each other, and then she says, if you play this game a couple of times, you'll realise that it always ends the same way. One person ends up with a monopoly where they own so much that they crush everyone else. There's a reason that Monopoly famously starts arguments. It's because this game is not supposed to be fun. It's supposed to teach you a lesson about the dangers of letting one person control so much. Meiji writes, the Landlord's Game is based on present prevailing business methods. This the players can prove for themselves, and they can also prove what must be the logical outcome of such a situation, i.e. that the land monopolist has absolute control of the situation. The land monopolist is the monarch of the world. The remedy is the single tax. And then Meiji writes a second, Georgist set of rules. In these rules, instead of paying rent to the landowner, the land rent goes into a communal pot, and the owner only gets the extra money for the houses he's built on the land. When the communal pot gets big enough, then players can buy the utilities and railroads together and make them publicly owned. And after that, anything that goes in the communal pot gets used to increase the wages you get for going all the way around the board. It's a cooperative game. She says that this is what the economy would be like under Georgism, and that it would benefit everybody by equalising opportunities and raising wages. So, her game was meant to satirise monopolies, not celebrate them. Something that has been absolutely lost in translation in the modern game, where you're a savvy business guy with money flying out of a massive money sack. Meiji got a patent for her board game in 1904. at a time when less than 1% of US patents went to women. And 2 years later, she had the game published. So, you could buy the landlord's game in the 1900s, but it was really common back then to just make your own board games. You would go round to a friend's house, you play a game, and then you borrow it and make a copy of your own. And you might change it a bit to suit yourself. The landlord's game becomes a kind of folk game like this, being passed from person to person by word of mouth. And every now and then, one of those people will add something to bring the game even closer to the Monopoly we have today. One of the places it becomes really popular is, of all places, a commune in Delaware called Arden. They started grouping the properties by colour, and they're the ones that gave it the name the Monopoly game. They also start to forget about the Georgist rules, and of course they're not writing Lizzie Major's patent number on their own homemade versions, so her part in the story gets forgotten. Even though Meiji will carry on updating the game into the 1920s, it's this folk version that becomes our modern Monopoly game. It also gets popular in the Quaker community in Atlantic City in the 1930s. Now, Atlantic City was a hotel town, so the game gets hotels. It gets free parking, and it gets Atlantic City property names, which the American version of the game still uses today. A lady called Ruth Hoskins has a board with a square labelled Go that players get $200 for passing. Ruth Harvey had chance and community chest cards that she made from old maid cards that she put through a typewriter. Jesse Rayford grouped his properties into threes. Eventually, the game made its way to an Atlantic City Quaker called Charles Darrow, who was introduced to it by his friend, Charles Todd. Like everyone else, Darrow made his own copy of the board. His was round instead of square. Todd's version accidentally misspelled Marvin Gardens as Marvin Gardens, and Darrow copied that onto his board, and that typo is still in the US game to this day. Now, Darrow's family was hit hard in the Great Depression, and his son had become mentally ill after a bout of scarlet fever and needed care. So Darrow gets an artist friend called Franklin Alexander to do some proper designs for the board so that he can send it out to publishers. And in 1935, Parker Brothers buys the rights to Monopoly. In its first year alone, it sells 278,000 units, earning Darrow $5,000 in royalties. A smash hit. Parker Brothers were the ones who added metal game pieces. I know that's not metal. This version was made in Britain in the 1950s, and so they didn't have a lot of metal kicking around after the war. Before this, people had been playing with whatever they had in their pockets, paper clips, pennies, jewellery, that sort of thing. Parker Brothers' original 6 pieces reflected the spirit of the 1930s. A top hat, a battleship, a thimble, an iron, a shoe, a cannon. Those pieces have changed a bit over the years, but some of them are still in the game today. They did ask Charles Darrow how he came up with the idea for the game, and he told them he'd invented it while he was unemployed during the Great Depression. They knew that Monopoly was similar to games like Lizzie Major's that had already been patented, but they decided to not say anything and instead get Darrow to get a patent on his version, which he did in 1935. In that same year, Parker Brothers publishes 3 of Lizzie Major's games, including The Landlord's Game. She gets $500, no royalties. If she knew about Monopoly, then her opinions on it haven't survived. Darrow's friends knew that he hadn't invented it, but neither had they, so it wasn't like they could sue him about it. Instead, they just stopped playing it, and they stopped talking to him. The game wasn't fun for them anymore. And then in 1936, a British game company called John Waddington gets the rights to publish Monopoly in the UK. And they want to make a version with London place names. So they send the managing director, Victor Watson, and his wife down to London for the weekend to pick out some place names. We don't know why they picked the names they did, but Watson wasn't a Londoner, he was from Leeds, so he picked some odd ones. Marlborough Street doesn't exist. There's a Great Marlborough Street, but that's not what he wrote. There is no street called Bond Street. There's an old Bond Street and a new Bond Street, And there's a tube station called Bond Street, but there is no street. Vine Street is tiny. It's only 70 feet long. Most maps don't even show it. Mayfair isn't a street, that's a whole area. And the Angel Islington isn't a street. That's a pub. We can have a pretty good guess that he was staying in the West End. Almost all the properties are in London's West End. There's only one place south of the river, Old Kent Road, and only one in the East End, Whitechapel Road, the cheapest 2 spaces on the board. There are some hangovers from the American version, like the policeman, who's dressed as a 1930s New York cop, not a London bobby, and the community chest, which was a short-lived welfare programme in the US and was not a thing in this country. But the London version has been sold as the default version across the Commonwealth and the former British Empire. I've met people from South Africa and Australia and Lebanon who all grew up playing the London version as kids. So, next time your parents are on the brink of divorce because your mum won't sell Pall Mall, but that's the point of the game, David! Take a deep breath and remember, the game is not supposed to be fun. You're supposed to learn something about our economic system. Your parents' divorce is capitalism's fault.
Thank you for watching. I have one more thing to say about Monopoly, and that is that you should not attempt a Monopoly pub crawl. There's too many stops. One man cannot drink that much liquid in one day. You're going to have to start at like 11 o'clock. It's not going to be a fun time. If you would like a fun time, I am a private tour guide. That is my day job. So if you're coming to London, have a look at my website. You can see what tours I offer. Get in touch. And if you like stories about weird people like Lizzie Meiji, I have a book, Mavericks, life stories and lessons of history's most extraordinary misfits. Each chapter is about a different person in history who had a weird life, either because they chose to do something strange with their lives or because life did something strange to them. It is available in hardback, ebook and audiobook versions from your favourite booksellers.